anyone watching. So thanks for being here again. So I believe we're going to have a two-purpose session this time. We're first going to talk about a calculator that's being on the WinnerOdds side for a long time. We will learn how to use it. We'll learn to understand its benefits. And after a certain point in the session, we will move on to user questions. So any doubts that I see in the chat, I'll note them down, be it about the calculator, about WinnerOdds football, or about just any general questions. So, hang on if this opens. So Miguel, you can make your introduction because I'm sure that you've got a lot to say about this. It's a calculator that I've noticed that it's been mentioned multiple times in articles, emails, but people unfamiliar with it may first want to know its purpose and why mastering it could be so beneficial. So I'll post a link in the chat. It's a calculator that you design that can simulate an entire betting system over millions of bets. So it's going to reveal a bunch of things about it, how much variance can affect it, but you can go a lot more in depth about it. So it's all yours. Here's
okay. So thank you for the introduction. I think that this calculator helps us to understand variance and to understand what is a drawdown, why is it going to happen, and it's not something that we cannot avoid in the future. The more bets you place, the higher the maximum drawdown you will suffer is something that will happen. It doesn't matter what you do. Even for positive expected value systems, you will suffer a big drawdown at some time. Then we have some strategies to manage your bankroll so that the probability of losing a big part of it is small, but it's not zero, and there is a small probability of suffering it. And the more people is betting, there is also a higher probability that one of them suffers a big drawdown. Then we have also some availability bias, because people that suffers this big drawdown is more probable that complains about it, that asks questions, and it's normal. We understand it, and we will try to help. For example, with this calculator, that I think that is a very, very useful tool. Well, first of all, I want also to thank the people that is already online. I think that as they know that we will publish the video later, probably they are not so interested in attending it now, and they know that they can watch this video later. But anyway, I think it's a very good option to understand better what are you doing when placing sports bets. Okay, I will share now my screen so that we can see this calculator. Okay, I will share my whole screen. Okay, now, are you watching this?
Yes.
Okay, this is on the old value betting blog that we will move someday to the WinnerOdds value betting, WinnerOdds blog. They will hide this. And then in this article, I will show the English version of the article. We have a detailed explanation of most of the variables we have here. So if you read this article later, you can read this detailed explanation of every variable and how we calculate some of the intermediate results. So it's something that I also recommend to read this when you have more time, and you have, if you are interested in understanding very well. And well, this is the calculator. These are the parameters we need: the number of bets, yield, the average bet size, the average weighted odds, meaning that if you place some bets with a higher stake, they have more weight, or they influence more the average odds that you are considering for these calculations. And then we have also some values here to calculate which is the probability of suffering a drawdown higher than this number of units, and the probability of having a yield higher than this percentage here. So these are the main variables we are going to change and play a little bit with them. Here there is something that was some time ago in a separate calculator, that is how much bankroll do you need, and we will talk about this later, okay? So first of all, we have to think about which period are we going to calculate. Normally, we consider how many bets are you placing in 1 year or in a long term. So if, for example, by following a tipster, you perform 1,000 bets and the tipster has or you expect to have a 5% yield and an average bet size of 1 unit at 2 odds, then by pressing this button here, calculate, we perform 10,000, for example, simulations of the profit you will obtain after this number of bets. So by doing so, we are placing a simulation of 10,000 multiplied by 1,000 bets. So it's 10 million bets that we are simulating in just a second, because this is a very fast calculation. It's just a multiplication. So when we do this, we obtain these results here. So you have placed 1,000 bets at this yield and this bet size. So you will obtain an average profit of 50 units. The hit rate will be 25.5. That is why you are obtaining this yield, because if these are the odds, you need to hit, or you need to have success more than 50% of the time, and this is 52.5. You are winning on average 0.05 units per bet, and these are some statistics about the variance you will suffer, the yield standard deviation. This is this statistic to calculate which is the probability of being of obtaining a yield positive just by luck. So the lower is this value, the better is the system. And this is the inverse of the p-value. That means that 1 of every 17 times, if you had 0% yield on the long term, you would obtain profit on the long term. So it's more or less a measure of the luck you can have and even being not profitable in the long term. So if this value is very low, that means that if you have profit, probability is not caused by luck. Regarding
it gives a lot of insight on what you can expect from a single system. It gives a lot of different insight of what you can expect in the long term for a specific system.
Mm-hmm. And then the second column is about the risk you are assuming. This is the expected maximum drawdown calculated by a formula we have. And this is the drawdown obtained on the simulations. So this value is a formula, and this value is a result of the simulations. Every time I calculate, this value can change a little bit. The average and the median, because the distribution of the maximum drawdown is not symmetrical, and the probability of suffering a drawdown higher than 50%. So in this case, the probability of suffering a big drawdown, 50% of your bankroll, is relatively small, 1%, but is not zero. So 1 of every 100 times you perform 1,000 bets, you will suffer a drawdown at some point higher than 50%.
Mm-hmm.
This is the probability of ending in with profit, around 94%. And this is a ratio I usually take into account to compare methods. The profit divided by the risk is a very good way to compare methods, because I want big profit and lower risk. So if I get much bigger profit, but I also have bigger risk, then is probably not worth to follow that method. So it's a good statistic to compare methods.
Nice.
Okay, this is a lot of information, and now we will play a little bit with these values and understand how it affects to the results. Okay, first of all, I will change the number of bets. Okay, if we have, for example, 1,000 bets in 1 year, what happens in 1 month? For example, that would be around 80 bets. Okay, so in this case, in 80 bets, we will have lower profit, same hit rate, same profit per bet, but the probability of being or ending with profit is reduced. So there is 100 minus 63% is 37% probability of not winning after 80 bets. So the less bets you place, the probability of having profit is lower. And if I place more bets, in this case 2,000 for example, the probability of not ending with a profit is lower and lower. So we go back to small number of bets. Of course, if I only place 80 bets, the probability of suffering a drawdown higher than 50% is zero, because you cannot lose 50 units in 80 bets. Is very difficult. On the opposite, the more bets you place, the probability of suffering a big drawdown always increases. So by doubling the number of bets, we had here 1.67 and now we have 4.5. So the more bets you place, the probability of suffering a big drawdown increases. It's something that you cannot avoid. It's maths. So you cannot hide, you cannot do anything, and finally you will suffer at some moment
eventually
a big drawdown. Okay. Now we will see what happens with the yield. I go back to 1,000 bets. So what happens if the yield is lower, for example, 2%? Then this probability of suffering a big drawdown increases, and also probability of having profit is lower, and it's something logical. But here we have a figure. We have some way to calculate it. So if you are very slow when placing bets and you always bet close to the minimum profitable odds that in the long term have a 2% yield approximately, then you will have worse results and higher risk, because you are getting less value from the bets you are placing with WinnerOdds. On the opposite, if you are very fast and you get, for example, 10% yield, because you are very fast and you always place bets as soon as possible, you are probably getting the best odds, then the risk is very or significantly reduced, and probability of obtaining profit is much higher. So it's something important. Not everyone places the same bets and not everyone gets the same value. And even if we show the average results for the users, some users are always above the average because they are faster or they have more bookies, or simply they place more bets and are less affected by variance. And users that are slower or have less bookies, so they cannot select the best odds, will probably be on the lower part of the results. But we take everything into account and calculate the average user, and this is something that is logical. Okay, so we have seen the influence of the yield. I come back to the 5%. And then how affects the average bet size? Well, this is proportional. If I double the bet size, the risk increases a lot. So when we recommend a bet size, we have taken into account this increase of the risk, and it's something that is mandatory to follow the stake recommendation, the bet size recommendation, because by doubling the bet size, the probability of a very high drawdown increases dramatically. So you have, instead of, for one, it was 1.68%. If you double your bet size, the probability of suffering 50 units is 35%. So it's something very important to follow the bet size especially when your bankroll is small. When your bankroll increases, many users have noticed that we recommend a relatively smaller bet size, because we take into account that sometimes you will place big bets and sometimes you cannot place them because of the liquidity and because of the restrictions. So we try to balance this by recommending a relatively smaller bet size. But for small bankrolls below 3,000 euros or below 5,000 euros, we recommend to follow the bet size and do not increase it because you are assuming a very big risk. But, well, this bet size doesn't affect the probability of positive yield, because it's just proportional. So it affects to the drawdown, but not to the probability of obtaining profit at the end. And finally, the odds. This is also a very, very important parameter, because the higher odds, the higher risk you are suffering. In this case, for example, for the same yield, if you increase your average weighted odds to, I don't know, with 2.5, for example, you are betting underdogs, then also your risk increases, probability of ending with profit decreases. So it affects a lot. So for the same yield, the lower odds means that the system is better. Obtaining a 5% yield with a system with 1.5 average odds is 3.3, for example, for the profit maximum drawdown ratio, and for 2.5, the system is half valued with this parameter, so that the average odds affect a lot. So you cannot take into account only the yield, but also the average weighted odds in order to compare different tipsters or different systems, or in WinnerOdds in order to compare different sports. Okay, and then about the distribution of the maximum drawdown, this is the shape. So on average, in this case, is around 25, so it will be more or less the average. But as this is not symmetrical, this average means that the probability of very, very high drawdowns is smaller, but not zero. And the probability of smaller drawdowns is slightly higher, but, well, on average is 25. So that is the reason we also show the median maximum drawdown, that is the more frequent, and is around 22, is more or less this area here. If I increase, for example, the average odds, then this distribution enlarges so that the probability of suffering a drawdown higher than 100 units is not zero. So you are assuming more risk. Or if you come back to odds number 2 and you increase your bet size, this is the same also. Oh, sorry, I have to average bet size 2. Okay, the bet size is 2. There is no possibility of getting an even drawdown. So that is why the shape is like a non-continuous. But that is because you cannot obtain an even result by betting 2 units at every bet. So, but you also increase your risk, and the probability of having a drawdown higher than 100 is not zero.
I see. Seems like a really interesting tool to play around with. So do you recommend the average user to use this calculator for anything to be more confident in the system they're using? Or do you generally recommend it for people designing their own system?
Yes, if you are developing your own system, this calculator is useful to understand if you have a big enough sample. So I have placed 100 bets and I am winning 10% yield. Okay, 100 bets, 10% yield. Which is the probability of obtaining this just by luck? Then it is 15%. So 1 of every 6 times you are not profitable in the long term, but you are obtaining profit. So perhaps you feel confident, you feel that your system works, but this sample is very small. That's why looking at other parameters like the closing line value or other parameters that help you to be sure or not if your system is profitable or not. So just looking at the results, 100 bets is very small. But what if you have 1,000 bets? Then probability of being lucky with this yield, 10% at odds 2, is very small. So the probability of being lucky or obtaining profit just by luck is 1 every 1,300 times. So it's very small probability, and probably you have a profitable system in the long term. If you are a user or you are following a tipster, it's the same. You check the results and see if this or the sample or of the tipster is large enough to be confident that he will obtain profit in the long term. So in both situations, it's a very good tool, and I had it on Excel, and I thought that this was very useful, and I recommend everyone to play a little bit with this calculator to understand how much info do you need, what happens if the yield is very low but the average odds are also very low. So this is a very, very profitable system with a very small drawdown, and you can increase probably your bet size if you are betting at small odds, because you can assume bigger risk. Or it's something that I find very useful to understand how it works. And also we have included here a single simulation, so you can see more or less which can be the shape of a series of bets. And every time you press calculate, you have a new simulation, and with the same exact parameters, you can get very different results in a 1,000 length simulation. For example, here, just by luck, I have obtained a system with negative profit. The probability of being negative at the end is around 6%. So in this simulation, I have obtained negative profit, and here the red line is the drawdown. Okay, so I can check many times, many histories with the same long-term parameters, and understand that even for the same tipster, for the same system, you will have very different results just by luck. So look here at the vertical scale. Sometimes we have 20, sometimes you have 60, sometimes we have 120. So and in the long term, you will have the same results. So even 1,000 bets at these odds and with this yield is a relatively small sample. So it's something that you have to take into account and be patient. This is like like something that our brain is not prepared to.
It's
how
not
big
intuitive.
is the variance? Yeah, it's like you cannot imagine this. Is when we talk about very big amount of money, for example, is for our brain it's difficult to understand the difference or compare. And in this case, it's the same. You will not be able to understand how big is the variance after 1,000 bets. If I place 10,000, for example, okay, I will reduce the number of simulations. But okay, even with 10,000, this scale here changes a little bit, but it's much more stable. You always have around 500, 400. So it changes also, but with 10,000 bets, the relative or the differences between every simulation are smaller.
Mm-hmm.
But the drawdown will always increase during the total series of bets, and it's a good way to understand what can happen. And you can check also the length of the drawdown. Perhaps here you have I don't know, 10 or 1,000 bets or 500 bets without reaching any all-time high, or even at the end from here there are 700 bets and you are still below the previous maximum. So it's something that is difficult to understand, but with this simulation you can have some sense about what is happening. And well, now I will explain this part here. that is prepared also to calculate which is the minimum bankroll you need to take profits from one system, taking into account how much it costs. Okay, and I find it also very interesting because when you are following a tipster, perhaps you are making a mistake if your bankroll is not big enough or if the fee is very high. So this is the best way to understand if you have enough money in your bankroll or your bet size is big enough to compensate the fees. I have here two parameters because probably we will obtain lower yield than the tipster or the system and lower number of bets, so we can be a little bit conservative here. I will obtain 90% of the yield of the system and I will place 90% of the bets of the system. For example, if we had a tipster with 1,000 bets per year and 12 months at 50 euros, for example, then the total cost at the end of the year will be 600. And if I intend to win, for example, 3,000 euros, that is more or less 5 times the fees. Okay, with this calculator, what I obtain is, okay, my real yield will be 4.5, that is 90% of the yield. The number of bets I will place is 1,000, then I place 900. My gross profit is the sum of the fees and the expected net profit. And which is the bankroll I need? It is 8,000, almost 9,000 euros. So I need, for this system, I need a very big bankroll in order to make it profitable or to win a net amount of 3,000. So this calculator also helps us to be aware of which bankroll we need, depending on our expectations, depending on the fees, and also the profitability of the tipster. And now I will apply this to WinnerOdds so that we see which is the recommended bankroll we need here.
I do remember that I tried to mess with the calculator at some point, and I was confused by the fee part because it doesn't show units. So I thought it was some percentages, something that I didn't understand, but it's in dollars.
Yes, in this case, it's the same than here, euros or dollars or money, okay? But money for the period of this number of bets. If I calculate for 1 month, for example, in 1 month, I place 80 bets, then I have to place here the fees for 1 month and the profit I expect in 1 month. 5 times the net profit would be this, and then I need higher bankroll because, well, I have divided by, this would be more or less the same situation than before. So if I place 1 month here, I have to place here fees for 1 month and my expected net profit for 1 month. So this is how to use this part of the bankroll, and this always related to the same period.
It seems really useful for random tipsters that you find out there that seem appealing to know how much bankroll to.
Yeah, how much bankroll do you need? Okay, and now I will use this for WinnerOdds statistics. So what I see, for example, is here, when I compare the general statistics, the WinnerOdds tennis history for the history made by the first bet placed by a user, or the odds that the first user has placed, and this is the average user. And we have here the same for football. So I will do this, for example, for tennis first. So the variables I need for 1 year, for example, are these. I have on average 3,789 bets. So I will place that here. Okay, I will do this yield for the main or for the average user because I have placed here the number of bets of the average user, but I can do it also with the general or with the history, total history. I will do it like that. 1 second. So I will place 30,971 here. The yield will be, in this case, 8.37. And then I will apply this yield reduction factor and number of bets reduction factor, okay? So this is, in this case, the number of bets is this parameter here, 0.27. That means that a normal user places one of every 4 bets we recommend. We recommend bets 25 hours per day, 7 days a week. And in many bookies, and probably you don't have many bookies, you are not awake the whole time. So you place one of every 4 bets. So this would be 0.27. And regarding the yield, the average user gets 4.06 divided by 837, 0.48. Okay, so this is 0.48. So which is the average bet size of the users? I also have calculated that here, the average bet size in units, because the bankroll can be different for every user. So this is 0.92, okay? The average bet size. And the average weighted odds, meaning that lower odds have more weight because you place bigger bets, are 1.755. 1.755. Okay, so which are the fees? 120 per month. Which is the expected profit? More or less, normal figure is 5 times the fees or 6 times the fees. So I will place 600 euros on average of net profit, so without fees. Then I calculate this, and what I obtain, I have to pay the fees for 1 year, sorry. Then is 120 multiplied by 12, more or less. Okay, is this. And this multiplied by 12 is, in 1 year, 7,200. Then which bankroll I need if I don't change it, if I have the same bankroll for the whole year? It would be 6,000. Okay, so if I
that's
want
higher
to
than
obtain,
what you recommend usually?
yeah, but this is for constant bankroll.
Right.
Okay. On the opposite, if you divide this by month, then as you are going to increase your bankroll when you are obtaining profit, that's why we recommend as a minimum recommended value 3,000. Is more or less half this bankroll. But this is a minimum. Of course, if you have higher bankroll, the better for you. You cannot expect to win 7,000 euros with a very small bankroll. But here we are not simulating the increase or reinvesting your profits. So in this calculation, you have a constant bankroll for the whole year. That is not so realistic, but this is something that gives you an idea of how much bankroll do you need. If you had for 1 month, we could calculate this for 1 month, and then you will have the same bankroll, but the profit will be higher. Okay.
So someone in chat is asking if the 0.27, that's the followability, right? Should that be in yield reduction factor or betting reduction factor?
Okay, it's the opposite.
Yeah. Okay. That
sorry.
doesn't make sense.
This is the number. The yield reduction was 0.48. Sorry, my mistake. Okay. As this is what affects the profit and this proportional, the bankroll doesn't change. But you're right, this yield reduction factor was about half, and number of bets reduction factor is about 27%. So this is what you expect, and okay. Even with constant bankroll, with this initial bankroll, you can get more or less double your bankroll after 1 year, even with this yield reduction and betting reduction factor. I always recommend to, if you know someone that follows a tipster, to ask about how many bets they place, how much value they lose, so that you can have an idea, because this is influences a lot your required bankroll. Okay, if you are able to follow more bets, 0.4, you are placing more bets by the same fees, so the required bankroll is lower. If you are very slow and you place a very small amount of bets, then you need higher bankroll in order to get the same net profit. So it's something that, well, it's an estimation, but it gives a good idea of how this works when you are following a system.
Do you think that this betting reduction factor is the main difference between football and tennis? Because in your charts that you showed, the obtained result for the users is very similar, but the results obtained by the system do differ a lot.
They differ a lot at this moment, and there is something that compensates, because we have here in this much more bets than for football, but the followability of the football is slightly higher, and the yield obtained at this moment is also a little bit higher than for the average user in tennis. That is also because the average odds we place in tennis are smaller or are lower than the average odds we place in football. So this yield is better, but as you are having higher odds, you also increase your risk, so it is not proportional. Well, I can do the same for football. It is 8,385. The yield of the general history is around 7.1. The average bet size, here the average bet size is 1.48 in this case, 1.48. Average weighted odds was around 2, 194. And which are the yield and betting reduction factors? They are, for the yield, we have, in this case, the yield obtained is, I don't have it, 7.1. Sorry, is 555.078. So these odds are easier to get, similar to the best odds a user have placed. So it's 0.78. And the betting reduction, it was 35 or...
Yeah.
Yes, 0.35. So the fees are the same, and then you get lower required bankroll because we have obtained much better yield reduction factor. You also have, as people is less restricted, probably they can place bigger bet size because this average bet size placed by the users is affected by restrictions. So proportional to the bankroll, that is smaller on average on football. The average bet size is higher, but that is because the people that is now betting on football have lower bankrolls. So the average bet size is relatively a little bit higher. And well, this is a different situation. So, okay, you have to take this into account. I think that we have shared this table in an email, but it was not complete. And I think that after this video, we will update it to include all these numbers. And I hope we can also have these numbers automatically updated on with the last year results, so that you can check this table every time you need. Here I have the same calculations with the same numbers we have obtained before, because as I have said, this calculator, I had it in Excel many years ago, and well, we get more or less the same result. And well, this is what I can say about the info we provide. So what happens for a specific user, and what happens when they are placing bets and have a very bad run. So it is nothing else than a sample from a small sample of 1 month. So 1 month, the general history can be also just by luck, not as good as the average in 1 year. And even in that sample, a user can get a subsample of this number of bets, so you can get even worse results. So this is something that a lot of people is suffering, and I will try to explain this a little bit. But okay, at the moment, do you have, or did you expect or were you conscious about the risk you are having with these results? For example, like this, about the probability of suffering a big drawdown, or what was your experience about the risk? Which has been your biggest drawdown you have suffered?
What mattered the most was getting to actually understand the results displayed on the main site. I feel like getting to understand that was all that it took for me to realize that it was worth it to keep going, because the risk in the short term would not actually affect things in the long term. So it just gotten to the point for me that I do have really negative weeks, but by just understanding that in the long term, it just averages out to what actually is displayed there, by getting to actually trust that, it just made it really easy for me to not get super conscious about those negative streaks. But I do understand that it takes a long time to get there, and that some people who really get affected by those streaks have it really difficult to conceptualize that it's just a really small sample within their entire history. And it does feel like this calculator would be really good to put that into perspective, and to show that it's just inevitable, and that you're going to go through it, but that eventually it's just not going to matter, the current negative streak.
Yes, I think that we are partially guilty of this bad sensation about after 1 week, because when we selected a period to show your results, we could have wait for every month, but we thought that, well, we have all the data, so we can split the results by weeks, and probably this was not a very good idea, because you are mentally affected by your weekly result, and 1 week is a very short term in this betting results. So it's something that when we selected 1 week for each period, we thought that it was a good way to follow your results, but you should probably forget about the weeks and look at least in 6 months period, or even 1 year, because the variance you can suffer in 1 week is very high. There is something that I have done many times with the calculator, that is, okay, in 1 month, a user can place 400 bets. For example, for tennis, an average yield of 4.5, bet size 1, average weighted odds 175. And then I will set this at 1, because we are not calculating now the minimum bankroll. So, but which is the probability of ending 1 month without winning anything? It is still 100 minus 85. It is still 15%. So it is a relatively high percentage. So don't expect to win every month. One of every 6 months, probably you will not win anything. And this is something that is maths and you will suffer it. If it is your first month, bad luck, but it will happen sometimes. But what happens in 1 week? In 1 week, you place 100 bets, more or less. So the probability of not winning 1 week is around 33%. So one of every 3 weeks, you will lose. You have to be aware of that. And probably you have a streak of 5, 6, 8 weeks, 8 weeks winning, but you can also suffer 2 negative weeks, and it's just variance, so it's a very small period of time. It's something that is not easy to understand, that if your long-term yield as a user is 4.5 because you are on the average, you are not the faster of the users, you don't have all the bookies, you are restricted. And when you are restricted, what happens is that at some markets you can place the whole bet, at smaller markets you place part of the bet. So even if you count 100 bets, they are not full 100 bets, so the number of bets is a little bit smaller. So taking
I do have a
all of this into
question
account,
related to this, and it's a bit tangent, so I don't know
Yeah.
if you want to get to it because we're kind of running out of time. But I feel like most people can come to terms and understand that WinnerOdds is profitable in the long term, but obviously the importance of that relies on being able to reach it. So do you expect the long term to be unreachable in the future for the betting landscape? Because do you think that WinnerOdds has a bit of an expiration date in certain countries because the sites are going to start limiting really aggressively? Or do you think that's not going to happen because they also benefit from this type of users in some way?
Well, it depends on how many bookies you have available. If you have around 20 bookies, for example, you will have time to reach the long term, 1 year, for example. If you have in your country, or just because you don't want to open account in more bookies, you have 5 bookies, you have 2-3 months, so probably you will not reach long term. So you are placing some kind of big bet for 3 months, and in 3 months you can win or you can lose. But it's a risk you are assuming. So you need a lot of bookies, and you also need to place bets even restricted, because even you are not able to place the full bet, you still can take some value from smaller bets. So it's something that reaching this long term, that it is not 1,000 bets, it's probably around 5,000 or 10,000 bets. You need a lot of bookies, and it's something that is, I know it's difficult, but a lot of our users are reaching these results.
Yeah. We're going to look at a specific sample from table tennis, but we have 10 minutes. Do you think you have time to go through that?
For the result for table tennis? For the question of the user, yes.
Yeah.
So I have here an email of a table tennis user, and he says that, well, I have placed 47 bets per day. My profit has been only 300 bets, 300 euros or 400 euros. My yield is 0.41. So what I am doing wrong? Okay, you are not doing wrong anything. So you are following the method. Probably this user is being affected slightly because he, even placing 47 bets per day, he's probably not placing the full bet in all the bets. Restrictions or just liquidity or number of bookies or whatever you or this user, probably those bets are not full bets, but anyway, I will take into account this number 47, and which is the probability of obtaining 0.41% this month. Okay, so as this is a month sample, I will compare with the average yield of this month. So the average yield in April has been around 5% for the 20 users that are placing bets on table tennis. So I compare period by period. So if the average user has obtained 5% yield, then I place here 5%. The number of bets is 47 multiplied by 30, 1,400. Average bet size in table tennis is around 1, and average odds is around 2. So which is the probability of not winning? Probability of not winning is around 3%. Probability of his yield has been, as I have said, 0.41. Okay, so I place here yield 0.41. Probability is around 4%. 4% means that one of every 25 users will get a yield lower than 0.41. One of every 25. So are you being unlucky? Yes, but we have around 20 users, including myself. So even if all of them are able to place 1,400 bets, one of them probably will have a very low yield. So
yeah. So the takeaway
this
is
a
that
lot of bets in 1 month. I know a lot of bets in 1
Mm-hmm.
month, but it is still at these odds. It is still influenced by variance.
Exactly. So they were wondering, did I do something wrong? Was I extremely unlucky? And it's not that they did anything wrong particularly, just that this can easily happen.
Yes, one of every 25 users will get a low yield. Which is the probability of getting this low yield 2 months? Then you have to multiply 4% by 4%. That is, okay, 0.04 by 0.04 is 1 every 1,000 users, more or less. It's not 0, but the probability of getting this low yield after 2 months is much lower. So, well, it's something that can happen. It's not very frequent. If we had many users below this yield, so we will probably worry more about this. But we have to take into account that probably not all the bets have totalized the stake. So this is probably, I don't know, 1-200. Perhaps he's being very fast, but I don't know if he has all the bookies or not. And I don't know if the average yield he will get with those bookies is 5% or lower. So it's something that, well, it can happen. It's not so strange. And every month we have users with worse results than others. And this is what I wanted to explain to him. He is not doing anything wrong. I have seen his history bet by bet, and what I have seen is that, well, for example, in some tournaments he can place the whole bet because he has a lot of bookies. In other tournaments, perhaps he can bet only 1 or 2 bookies so that the stake is much lower. So it's something that, well, this is not, this calculator is an estimation, but it helps us to see that it is not so strange to have such a lower yield. Something that can happen. And, well, this is what I wanted to explain today. I think that it helps a lot to play a little bit with this and change your simulations and see how long can be the drawdown, which is the shape of this simulation with different odds or different yield, so that you can have some sense of the importance of the variance much easier than if I tell you just with words. So you can see this. And also about the maximum drawdown, that you have to take into account that the probability of a very big drawdown is not 0. So there is also something that can happen. This is a very risky activity, sports betting.
Yeah, well, so hopefully some users play around with this and better conceptualize the risk that they're taking, and they understand that a negative streak is not that uncommon. So we have 5 minutes left, but there is a question in the chat that seems interesting to me, which is, can you use this calculator to input the results, the expected results versus the results that you are recently obtaining to determine when a system is no longer worth your time, be it because you're not obtaining the results desired because you don't have enough money, or because it's just no longer performing the same that it used to.
Yeah, well, what you can calculate with this is how unlucky you have been with respect to the objective or the long-term results, and then by comparing it, evaluate if you have been very unlucky or not. In order to calculate if it is worth or not, as I have said, it depends on the bankroll. If you consider that the bets are positive expected value on the long term, it is worth for sure, and the problem is your bankroll. So if you have a very small yield, but it is higher than zero, it is a problem of bankroll. If you are sure of this positive yield, if it is very small, you need higher bankroll to get profit from it. If the yield is higher, then you need lower bankroll. But if it is positive expected value, it's a question of how much you bet or how big are the bets you can place. Of course, if you need such a big bankroll, but you cannot place the bets because of restrictions, because of liquidity or something, then the bankroll is not the limit, it's the bet size of every single bet that affects your expectation. So, well, I will read this. If the system is...
Yeah, that's the question I'm referring to.
Yeah. Isn't working? Yes, of course. For example, if I say, okay, after 2,000 bets, the long-term yield is, I think he has said 10%.
Yes.
10%, and you get minus 5% after 2,000 bets. So, which is the probability of getting a yield lower than minus 5%? Minus, okay. The probability of getting a yield higher than minus 5% is 100. So this is probably not the long-term yield. Okay, so if you, after 2,000 bets at these odds and this expected long-term yield, you are getting minus 5%, then this is probably not the long-term yield. If it is, for example, 5%, how rare is this? So even minus 5% is very, very low after 2,000 bets. Yeah, 1%, I don't know. Then you start having some probability of obtaining this low yield for this number of bets and this average odds. So minus 5% is a very, very bad result after 2,000 bets. So probably the long-term yield is much lower than you have assumed.
Yeah. So it seems like a great tool to play around with, take your own conclusions. Everyone's going to have to input their own experience and then decide from there. But it seems like it's giving you a lot of information to work with. So
yes, this tool was mentioned in Monte Carlo or Bust book, written by Joseph Buchdahl. I'm very proud of that because I think that Joseph Buchdahl is one of the bettors or one of the contacts I have in Twitter that knows more about sports betting. He understands very well the risk, he understands very well the distributions of bets and everything. And I also recommend his books because they are like gold for me. Even I would prefer to have these books before I started betting. So
it's a good praise.
If I had them before, I would have saved a lot of time, a lot of tests, and a lot of mistakes. And I have reached to my own conclusions, but they are very similar to the things I have learned from their books. And I think that he's a very good... he's very good at explaining all these situations, and it is worth to understand better what is happening when you are placing bets.
Sounds like it. Okay, that's a really interesting recommendation. So if there are no more questions in the chat, we are past the deadline, so we're going to wrap things up. I don't see any more
so.
questions. So it was a pleasure to be
Thank
here
you.
again. I hope that this clarified a lot of questions, and yeah, it was really informative. I agree. As someone who is not that familiar with the calculator, it definitely compelled me to go and check my own experience there. So thanks everyone for watching. And thank you for the explanation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
See ya.